Imagine you are the ruler of a new dynasty, tasked not only with maintaining power, but also with rewriting the very essence of the past. Chronicles have been revised, dissenters have been exiled, and the church is ready to bless any step you take. However, uncomfortable witnesses remain on your land. Sturdy stone buildings with asphalt floors and strange mechanisms in their basements that cannot be explained through the lens of your new religion. For the people, this is a dangerous sign. If these walls were not built by you or your gods, then there was another force, another faith, and another way of life. With a stroke of your pen, you turn the problem into a resource. Equipment is discarded, openings bricked up, and signs with fabricated construction dates are hung on the facades. What will you choose? To allow people to question the origins of these monumental structures, or to paint them as shrines, ensuring that the erased memory of the people remains forever buried beneath a layer of church gilding? Now let's take a look at how this played out in real history. Enter any old city: Tula, Yaroslavl, Kostroma, Vladimir. It doesn't matter which. The main thing is that there are brick churches that are officially dated to the 17th or 18th centuries. There are dozens of them in each of these cities. They stand among panel high-rises, amid asphalt and trolleybus wires. Yet they always catch the eye. Majestic, massive, clearly older than everything around them. Red brick, white trim, domes with crosses. A postcard version of Russia. Approach any of them closer. Very close, right up against the wall. If the walls are plastered, whitewashed with lime, or painted with fresh paint, you will see nothing. A smooth surface, an even color. No questions. A sign at the entrance: Church of the Ascension of the Lord, built in 1712 with the funds of merchant so-and-so. Believe and pray. But find a spot where the plaster has crumbled, where time and moisture have done their work, where the brickwork is exposed, revealing the skeleton of the building, where you can see not cosmetics, but bones. This is where the true story begins. Not the one written in church documents and city directories, but the one embedded in the stone, in the joints, in the seams that no one intended to show. Look at the place where the main volume of the building transitions into the altar area. The altar is the eastern projection, either semicircular or rectangular. In an Orthodox church, it is always present. Without it, the temple is not a temple. Now, look at the junction between the main structure and this projection. Do you see the vertical line? The seam that runs from the very foundation to the roof. Clear, straight, like a cut made by a blade. Pay attention to the bricks on either side of this line. On the right, on the main building, the bricks are darker. The patina of centuries is visible. There is even some blackness, perhaps from fires, or from many years under rain and snow. But on the left, in the altar section, the bricks are lighter, fresher, as if they were laid from a different batch, or even at a different time. Now look at the joints between the bricks. In the main building, they are simple and functional. Horizontal rows, even masonry, without embellishments. But on the altar, the joints are elaborated. They were intentionally brought out, made decorative. Do you see how they are slightly recessed, how they create relief? This is the work of a craftsman who cared about beauty, about presentation. But if this is one building, constructed by one crew at the same time, why change the masonry technique halfway through? Why work simply and quickly on one part while taking the time for decor on another? And most importantly, the seams do not align. Take another look at the joint line. The rows of bricks on one side and the other are at different levels. They don't blend into each other, they simply meet a vertical line. The discrepancy isn't just a millimeter or a centimeter, it spans the entire height of the wall. This isn't evidence of a late repair, where part of the wall collapsed and was restored. It isn't a patch. It is a sign that the two parts of the building were constructed separately, at different times, by different people, for different purposes. The most obvious explanation presents itself. The church was built in stages. This was a common practice, right? First, they erected the main body, the nave, as it is called in architecture, a large hall for the worshippers. Then, when they had saved enough money, found craftsmen, and had the means, they added the choir section. Logical, economical, rational. If we assume that it was built in stages, then why are the connections between the two parts of the building so crooked? Do you see the metal pegs sticking out of the old wall and going into the new one? They are driven in at an angle, hastily. Do you notice the attempt to tie the bricks together, where the new masonry is supposedly connected to the old? But the ties do not hold. There is a gap left between the two parts, a crack that they tried to seal with a thick layer of mortar. If they had originally planned to add the altar in 5, 10, or 20 years, wouldn't they have left special brick extensions in the old wall? Wouldn't they have laid a common foundation that would connect both parts into a monolith? But architects did not do it that way. Look at the temples of the 12th and 13th centuries, the Assumption Cathedral in Vladimir, the Dmitrievsky Cathedral, the Church of the Intercession on the Nile, the white stone structures of the pre-Mongol period. Each of them is a cohesive composition. No visible seams, no lines where one part ends and another begins. Everything was built at once, according to a single plan, from a single material, by a single collective. And now look at the temples of the 17th and 18th centuries. The seams, different bricks, attempts to connect the incompatible, as if someone had tried to assemble a whole from various pieces. And now the main point. Imagine the process. The 17th century, a modest town somewhere in central Russia. The merchant community decides to build a temple. They gather funds. They hire a crew of stonemasons. They transport bricks, lime, and timber for the scaffolding. They pay the workers. They feed them. They build for 2 years, 3, maybe 5 years. And at the end of this marathon, they obtain a large stone box with windows, with doors, with a roof, but without an altar. Why? A church without an altar is not a church. It's just a building, a large hall, a storage room, a barn, anything but a temple. The altar in Orthodoxy is the Holy of Holies. It is the heart, the brain, the essence of the entire structure. All the layout stems from the altar. It is always oriented to the east. This is the canon, which must not be violated. Everything else is measured from it. The iconostasis, which separates the altar from the main space. The central nave, where the parishioners stand. The dining hall, where they gather before the service. The narthex, where those not permitted to partake can stand. If you are building a church, you first determine where the altar will be. You place a stake, orient it to the east, and from that point the entire temple unfolds. It's like building a house. First the foundation, then the walls, then the roof. You can't just put up the walls and the roof and then remember, oh, I still need to pour the foundation. According to church canon, the consecration of a temple without an altar is prohibited. Moreover, in ancient liturgical books, it is explicitly stated that the bishop must consecrate the altar in the sanctuary, and only after that does the building become a temple. No altar, no consecration. No consecration, no right to celebrate the liturgy. Why then was it built to last for decades? Why spend enormous amounts of money, effort, and years of the master's lives to create a box in which one cannot pray? The answer is one. They weren't planning to use it as a church anyway. Let's check the dates. This is important. Open the plaque on any old church in Tula. For example, the Ascension of the Lord Church on the Arsenal side. A beautiful brick building, 2 stories, with a dome in the Baroque style. The plaque says, "Construction began in 1712. The first floor was consecrated in 1755. The completion of construction and consecration of the second floor was in 1787. Count it. From beginning to end, 75 years. 3/4 of a century for one parish church. Not for a cathedral the size of a football field. Not for a Kremlin with towers and walls. For a regular church, of which there are thousands in Russia. Now open the guidebook to the Tula Kremlin. It is located in the same city, a couple of kilometers from the Ascension Church. It is a whole stone fortress. The perimeter of the walls is 1,600 meters. 9 towers reaching heights of up to 20 meters. Underground passages. Entrance gates with drawbridges. Everything is made of brick, millions of pieces. It was built in 6 years, from 1514 to 1520. 6 years for the Kremlin. 75 years for the church. I will repeat because it is important. A whole fortress, defending the southern borders of the Moscow state, with towers, walls, and moats. 6 years. One parish church, 75 years. This doesn't add up. Historians usually say, there wasn't enough money. Merchants gathered funds little by little from the world. Work was done intermittently. At times, there was war. At other times, famine or an epidemic. Parishioners contributed a penny each. And so the construction stretched out over a whole lifetime. Sure, a clear explanation. Let's take a closer look. The Ascension Church is 2 stories. This is an important detail. According to the official version, the first floor was consecrated in 1755. The second floor was completed only 12 years later, in 1767. Then a fire occurred, the church was damaged, and the restoration took several more years, with everything finally completed only in 1887. Question. Imagine this scene. The year is 1755. The first floor of the church is consecrated. Services are being held there. People come, pray, take communion. But above their heads, what is happening? Construction. Builders roam the scaffolding, carrying bricks, mixing mortar, laying the walls of the second floor. Dust is falling. Brick debris tumbles down. Mortar drips onto the floor. The workers curse, shout, maybe even sing songs. There is clattering, noise, and bustle. And amid all this chaos below, is a service taking place? Is the priest reciting prayers amidst the sounds of construction? Are the parishioners making the sign of the cross while bricks fall above their heads? Seriously? Try to imagine construction in reality. Laying the second floor means there's no roof over the first, or the roof is temporary and has to be taken down. This means rain and snow seep inside. In winter, there must be an ice rink in the lower temple. In summer, a draft and dampness. How can one serve there? How can one pray? But they tell us, we served. We served 12 years in an unfinished building, and then we spent another 20 years restoring it after the fire. Now let's calculate the materials. In the 18th century, bricks were made by hand. It wasn't an industry, it was a craft. They took clay, shaped it in wooden molds, dried it in the air for weeks, sometimes even months, and then fired it in kilns. The firing of one batch could take a week. The fuel used was firewood. Temperature control was done by eye. Defects could be up to 30%. To build a church measuring 30 meters by 20 meters, with wall thickness of 2 bricks, which is the minimum for strength, at least 200,000 to 300,000 bricks are required. The maximum output of a makeshift kiln is 500 bricks a day. However, not every day can be used for firing bricks. Breaks are needed for loading, unloading, and repairing the kiln. Let's say the kiln operates for 200 days a year. This amounts to 100,000 bricks per year. It would take 3 years just to produce the bricks for one church. Add time for laying bricks. The bricks are laid in rows. The mortar between the rows needs to set. This takes at least a day for every 3 to 4 rows. In winter, work stops. The mortar freezes. In spring and autumn, rain and dampness cause delays as well. Realistically, you can work for about 5 to 6 months a year. If a team of 10 people raises the walls by 2 meters in one season, then it will take 3 seasons to construct 6-meter-high walls, plus roofing, plus finishing. As a result, building a church from scratch takes about 7 to 10 years. This is if you work without breaks, if you don't get distracted by other orders, if materials are readily available, and if there is funding. 75 years is absurd. So either the church was not built from scratch, or it wasn't built at all in the sense we are being told. Either the building was already there and was simply remodeled, or the dates on the plaques are fake. What if the building was simply excavated? What if it had been buried under a landslide, clay, or soil after some catastrophe, and then it was cleared, cleaned, and repurposed for a new function? Let's head up to the second floor of the Ascension Church. Let's see what's up there. We enter through a narrow staircase. We climb up, and we find ourselves in a huge hall. The ceilings are at least 6 meters high, maybe even 7. The space is open, spacious, and bright. Large windows allow light to stream in. Columns stand in neat rows supporting the arches. It feels as if we have stepped not into a church, but into some kind of exhibition hall. And now look down. At your feet. Asphalt. Stop. Reread. Asphalt. In the church. On the second floor of the temple, not stone slabs which sometimes appear in ancient buildings, not marble, not granite, not even cast iron that was used in the 19th century for floors in wealthy mansions. Asphalt. Dark, compressed, industrial. The very material they use to pave roads. Have you ever seen asphalt in a church? No? How about on the second floor of a temple? Not that either? Look closely. The asphalt is poured between the columns. The columns stand in 2 rows, dividing the space into 3 parts. They are not decorative, they bear weight. Once, these columns supported not just a roof, but a floor between levels. This means that the building was originally 3 or 4 stories tall. The columns supported the upper levels. This is a typical construction for warehouses, manufactories, and factories. It is where the load from heavy equipment or stored goods needs to be distributed. Many will now write in the comments, "The asphalt was laid later." This is a Soviet alteration. When the church was closed in the 30s, it was turned into a warehouse, a club, or some utility space. That's when they poured the asphalt to make it easier to use the building. I also thought at first, renovation during the Soviet era. But why in the 30s and 40s of the 20th century, when churches were being closed and repurposed for state needs, would one put an asphalt floor in a former place of worship? Asphalt is an expensive material. In the 30s, it was used strictly for its intended purpose, for roads, for airfields, for industrial sites. If a church needed to be converted into a warehouse, they would simply pour concrete. Cheap, fast, functional. Or they would lay wooden flooring, much easier. Why waste asphalt on a floor inside a building? In the 19th century, asphalt, and the asphalt underfoot in the Ascension Church is clearly old, cracked, and worn, was used in factories, in textile mills where protection from moisture was needed, in metalworking plants where strength and spark resistance were required, in spinning mills where machines created vibrations. Asphalt provided a smooth surface that did not crack under load, did not sag, and did not absorb oils and water. Look at the thickness of the asphalt layer in the church. It is uneven. In some places, it's 3 to 4 centimeters, while in others, it's all 7 to 8. This is not a modern laying technique. It's an old, pre-revolutionary method. The asphalt was mixed with sand and gravel, heated in vats, and poured hot. It set unevenly, resulting in waves. This is exactly the picture we see. Now pay attention to the marks at the base of the columns. Do you see the wear? The circular scratches on the asphalt around each support? These are the traces of machinery. Once, machines were attached to these columns, possibly drive shafts and belt drives. The equipment rotated, created a load, and over the years, traces were left on the floor. In an Orthodox church, there is no equipment. There are icons, candlesticks, and lecterns. They do not rotate. They do not create vibration. They do not leave such traces. So, it was an industrial building, a manufactory, a factory, a workshop, and it was converted into a temple later on. The process of conversion was straightforward. They take an existing industrial building, clear it of equipment, machines are dismantled, shafts are cut off, everything unnecessary is taken out. The walls are whitewashed. Windows are either widened or bricked up, depending on needs. An altar is added. Bricks are laid hastily, connections are made carelessly. An iconostasis is installed. The walls are painted with biblical scenes. A consecration is held. They record in the church books, "Built in 1712. No one will ask. No one will check the seams under the fresh plaster. But the plaster crumbles, and the asphalt remains. And if this is true for one church, then how many more are there? How many such temples were actually factories, manufactories, warehouses, anything but places for prayer? Let's go beyond Tula. Let's look wider. Yaroslavl is a city often called the capital of the Golden Ring. Dozens of brick churches from the 17th century. The Church of Elijah the Prophet, the Church of John the Baptist, the Church of Nicholas the Wonder Worker. Each one is an architectural monument. Each is protected by the state. Approach any of them. Find a section without plaster. Look at the junction between the main building and the altar. Do you see the seam? Kostroma, Church of the Resurrection on Debra, 17th century. Seam. Nizhny Novgorod, Church of the Nativity of John the Baptist, 17th century. Seam. Vladimir, Suzdal, Murom, Pereslavl-Zaleski. The same picture everywhere. Large brick buildings, dated to the 17th and 18th centuries. And everywhere, if you look closely at the unplastered sections, you can see a vertical seam. The altar part was added later. Or it was attached to a building that initially was not a church at all. Open pictures of old churches on the internet. It doesn't matter which ones or where. Choose any city in Russia. Look at the junction between the main volume and the altar projection. In 8 out of 10 cases, if the brick is visible, you will see a line. A vertical, clear line that seems unnatural for a monolithic structure. This cannot be a coincidence. At first glance, it seems, so what? Perhaps this is just a characteristic of church construction from that era. The 17th and 18th centuries were times when money was scarce, skilled craftsmen were few, and materials were expensive. They built as best as they could. First, the main hall, the nave. Then, years later, they completed the altar. Doesn't this make sense? But then, why are there no such seams in the temples of the 12th and 13th centuries? Open the images of the Assumption Cathedral in Vladimir, 12th century. White stone. The building is constructed as a unified whole. The altar, the central nave, the narthex, everything is made from the same material, by the same workshop, in one period. No visible boundaries. The Dmitrievsky Cathedral, also in Vladimir, from the end of the 12th century. Monolithic. The Church of the Intercession on the Neural, a gem of ancient Russian architecture, 1065 AD. A cohesive composition where it is impossible to tell where one part ends and another begins. And now, look at the temples of the 17th and 18th centuries. The seams, different masonry, attempts to connect the incompatible, as if someone tried to glue together a building from pieces. Look at the proportions. In canonical temples, the altar part occupies a strictly defined share of the total length of the building, approximately 1/4 or 1/5. This is mathematics refined over centuries. It provides harmony and balance to the structure. Now take a look at the churches from the 17th to 18th centuries. Sometimes the altar is too small, clearly squeezed in later, as if there wasn't enough space. Other times it's too bulky. It juts out, disrupting the proportions. It's as if it was made separately, without knowing the exact dimensions of the main structure. Building a church without an altar, and then adding it later, is like constructing a house without a foundation beneath one of the load-bearing walls, and then, 10 years later, realizing, oh, it seems something is settling here. We need to put in supports. That's not how it's done. That's never been done that way. Check the documents. Open the metric books of the churches from the 17th and 18th centuries. Look at the wording. Built in year, with funds from merchant by the blessing of, through the efforts of, the craftsman. A template. Identical phrases in different cities. It's as if they were written by the same hand. Now open the documents on the churches from the 12th to 13th centuries. There you'll find the details. The names of specific craftsmen, how much stone was brought, from where, how much was paid, what problems arose during construction. Living texts that tell a story. But in the documents of the 17th and 18th centuries, there are dry formulas, no details, just the date, the name of the customer, and the consecration. That's it. As if they are hiding the real process. No one will ask. No one will check the seams. Because on the surface is plaster, white, smooth, hiding everything. But the plaster is crumbling, and the brick begins to tell its story. Now let's stroll through the streets of Old Tula. Here is the Church of St. George the Victorious, abandoned, partially destroyed. The roof has collapsed. The windows are shattered. The walls are covered in cracks. A local enthusiast named Alexander is trying to restore it with his own money, as the Tula diocese cares nothing for this building. He collects donations, buys cement, sand, and bricks. He works on his own, sometimes with the help of 2 or 3 parishioners. Slowly, little by little, he is bringing life back to the temple. Approach the Church of George. Around it, by the walls, lie huge round stones. The diameter is about a meter, with a thickness of 30 to 40 centimeters. In the center of each is a hole. Officially, these are elements of landscaping. They were filled with cement and buried in the ground, supposedly for flower beds or decorative borders. Look at the surface of these stones. Come closer, sit if you need to. Do you see the graininess? Do you notice that the stone is uneven, with inclusions of darker or lighter particles? This is not granite, not marble. This is sandstone or limestone, processed under high pressure. Now look at the side surface, at the part that was once worked on. Do you see the grooves? Deep furrows that go around in circles. These are traces of friction. The stone was rotating and something was rubbing against it, scratching it, wearing it down. These are not decorative elements. These are sharpening stones, millstones. Such were used in mills, blacksmith shops, and metalworking industries. The stone was mounted on a shaft which rotated, manually, with the help of water or animal power. Tools were sharpened on the stone, metal was processed, and grain was ground. This is a working tool without which no artisanal production could function. Historians often say that stones were brought in from the surrounding area after the mills and workshops closed down in the 19th and 20th centuries. They were used as makeshift materials, for steps, for reinforcing foundations, for creating flower beds, for anything at all. Just recycling unwanted junk. At first glance, it seems logical. The stones were brought in after the mills were closed. And that sounds reasonable. Until you ask one question. Why are these stones located specifically at churches? Why not near residential houses? Not near administrative buildings? Not near shopping arcades or inns? Not near barracks or warehouses? Why do industrial artifacts weighing close to a ton concentrate specifically around temples? A sharpening stone is not carried around simply for the sake of beauty. It weighs between 500 kilograms and a ton, and sometimes even more. To move it, you need a winch or a team of oxen. To transport it on a cart, you need a sturdy wagon and a paved road. This is not the kind of item that can be taken and driven around the city in search of a place to put it. He lies there where he worked. Count the stones around the Church of George. 6 of them. 6 massive grinding stones, about a meter in diameter, weighing nearly a ton each. This indicates that the production was large-scale and continuously operational. 1 or 2 stones would be sufficient for a small forge. 6 indicates the scale of a serious manufacturing operation, where dozens of people worked, processing metal in industrial volumes. So, near the Church of St. George the Victorious stood a workshop, or a mill, or a metal processing shop. The church building was part of this industrial complex. Perhaps there was a warehouse for finished products inside the church itself. Maybe the craftsmen lived there. Perhaps machines were set up there, and then the function changed. The building was transformed into a temple. An altar was added. An iconostasis was installed. The stones were left lying there, too heavy to be removed, too useless in the new reality to care about. They were poured over with cement, turned into supports or elements of landscaping, and forgotten what they once were. But the stone remembers. Its grooves, its scratches, its wear. These are memories of another function, of another life of the building. And if there are grinding stones near the Church of George, it means that the church stood next to a workshop, or it was a workshop itself. Now let's take a look at the dates. The 17th century. Russia has just emerged from the time of troubles. Polish intervention, civil war, famine, epidemics. The country's population has declined dramatically. Some estimates suggest up to 30%. Entire regions have become depopulated. Villages are abandoned. Fields have overgrown with weeds. Cities have burned down and stand half empty. And so, in this period, when it seemed necessary to restore the economy, feed the people, rebuild the burned houses, and revive trade and crafts, suddenly a mass construction of churches begins. Not just 1 or 2, dozens, hundreds. Stone, brick, large, expensive. Who built them? Where did they find workers? Who fed the crews of stonemasons? Where did the money come from? For whom are these churches, if the population has died out? The official history says, merchants donated, communities raised funds. The craftsmen worked out of piety, almost for free, for the salvation of their souls. Let's do the math. Just for one average church, you need 300,000 bricks, plus lime for the mortar, dozens of tons, plus wood for scaffolding, for formwork, for roofing, hundreds of logs, plus iron for connections, for fastening the domes, tons of metal, plus wages for the masons, carpenters, roofers, plus their food, housing. Multiply that by the hundreds of churches built in a single century. Where are the production facilities? Where are the traces of the quarries where clay for bricks was taken? Where are the kilns for firing? One kiln produces 500 bricks a day, meaning that for 300,000 bricks, it takes 600 days of continuous work of one kiln. For 100 churches, hundreds of kilns are needed, operating for decades. Where are they? Where are the mountains of slag, the waste of production? Where are the traces of the forests that were cut down for fuel for the firing? They are not there, or they are not being shown, or they are not being looked for. And the churches stand. So, they were not built. They were repurposed. They took what already existed. Buildings left from a previous era. Strong, functional, brick. They cleared away the debris, excavated from underneath the ground, washed off the dirt. They added an altar, installed a dome, hung icons, and declared, "Constructed in such and such year, with funds from such and such merchant or nobleman." The documents were processed. Entries were made in the church books. A plaque was hung on the wall. Everything was official. Everything according to the law. Only the seams on the walls tell a different story. Seams don't lie. You can't fake bricks. You can't explain the asphalt on the floor with piety. And now, the most important thing. In the year 1654, a church schism occurred in Russia. This event split the country into two factions, and its consequences are still felt today. Patriarch Nikon began reforms. He changed the rituals, rewrote the service books, replaced the two-finger sign with a three-finger sign, and changed the spelling of Christ's name from Jesus to Ihus. It seemed like trivialities, but behind these petty details lay something greater. Old books were declared heretical. The old believers, those who did not accept the reforms, began to be persecuted. They were imprisoned, executed, exiled to Siberia, burned in wooden structures. Boyarinya Morozova, Protopope Avvakum. These are just the most well-known names. But how many nameless people perished in this struggle? We are told, this was a dispute about whether to cross oneself with 2 or 3 fingers, about how to correctly pronounce the name of God. A religious conflict, a struggle for the purity of faith. The most obvious explanation. But then answer the question, why are new churches being built in large numbers after the schism? Why is there suddenly such a need for so many temples? The population decreased after the time of troubles. Villages are deserted. Cities have burned down. People are poor and hungry. Yet there are more churches being built. Much more than there were before the schism. Look at the dates of the buildings. Open the directory for any Russian city. Tula, Yaroslavl, Kostroma, Nizhny Novgorod, Vladimir. Look at the churches. 90% of the temples are from the second half of the 17th century and the 18th century. But where are the churches from the 15th and 16th centuries? There are only a few. Literally just a handful for the entire city. Where have they gone? Did they burn down? All at once? Did they collapse from age? In 100 years, stone buildings turned to dust and then suddenly learned to be built to last for centuries? It doesn't add up. So, after the schism, there was no construction of new churches. There was a reworking of already existing buildings. Functional spaces were seized for the new religion. The old faith was declared heresy. Old books were burned. Tens of thousands of volumes that could not be amended were simply thrown into the fire. Old temples, if they even existed in the form we understand them, were destroyed or transformed beyond recognition. The industrial buildings left over from a previous era awaited their fate. Moreover, the process unfolded synchronously. From the 1650s to the 1710s, churches with identical dates, identical phrases in documents, and identical seams on walls began to appear across the country. This could not have been spontaneous. It was an operation. The scheme was simple and effective. Step 1. Declare a rift. Create chaos, confusion in minds. Destroy old texts that may contradict the new version. Burn books, icons, everything connected to the old faith. Step 2. To seize the industrial buildings left behind by the previous civilization under the pretext of constructing new temples. There are plenty of buildings. They are empty, and the people do not know how to use them. It's the perfect opportunity. Step 3. Set up altars, install iconostases, conduct a consecration. Transform factories and manufacturing plants into churches. Hang crosses, arrange icons, and initiate services. Step 4. Rewrite history. These buildings have always been temples. They were built by pious merchants with donations from parishioners through the labor of master pilgrims. Here are the documents. Here are the records in the metric books. Here are the names of the builders. Everything is official. And the people believed, because there was no alternative. Because to argue meant facing repression. Because the new authorities, both religious and secular, spoke in unison. The documents will confirm, the annals will record, the church will bless. Only the seams on the walls will remain as a testament to what once was, and the dates on the plaques that do not match the technological capabilities of the era, and the documents filled with too many vague phrases, as if they were written from a template. And now the question arises. If in the 17th century factories and manufactories were turned into churches, then before that there must have been another system. A system where there were no churches in our understanding, where there were industrial buildings serving some function. What kind of civilization was that? Who lived in it? What did they believe in? How did they work? There are no answers, because everything has been destroyed. Books have been burned. Old icons have been rewritten. Buildings have been remodeled. History has been completely rewritten. But the stone remained, and it speaks. Look further. The Ascension Church in Tula. We have already talked about it. It has 2 floors, with an asphalt floor on the second level and a seam between the main building and the altar. Now take a look at the architectural style. The main building is designed in the style of classicism. It dates back to the second half of the 18th century. Strict proportions, symmetry, and restraint in decoration characterize it. Straight lines, clear geometry, and a minimum of embellishments define its appearance. Rationality, order, and logic prevail. Classicism arrived in Russia in the 1760s and 1770s, dominating until the early 19th century. And now look at the drum and the dome. This is Baroque. Lavish plasterwork, intricate shapes, excessive ornamentation. Dynamics, movement, emotion. The Baroque style dominated in the first half of the 18th century, during the era of Elizabeth Petrovna, Rastrelli, luxury, and ostentatious wealth. Classicism and Baroque are different epochs, different philosophies, different principles of form construction. It's like wearing sneakers with a tuxedo. You can do it, but it's absurd. Some might say, the architect experimented, blended styles, and created something their own, something unique. But in the 18th century, this was not done. Each era had its own canon, its own set of rules that everyone followed. Deviating from the canon was considered bad taste, a mistake, a sign of ignorance. The architects of that time learned from masters and worked within the framework of tradition. They did not mix styles like paints on a palette. They adhered to established models. So the dome with the drum was added later, after the main building was already constructed. They took a ready-made model from another church. Perhaps they copied it from a drawing, or maybe they just hired a master who knew how to create domes in the Baroque style, as that was his training. The task was simple: to make the building look like a church. It didn't matter how harmonious it was. The main thing was to do it quickly, recognizably, and functionally. In the 18th century, Baroque was already going out of fashion. The era of classicism, enlightenment, and rationalism was dawning. Catherine the Great despised the excesses of Baroque, considering it tasteless. Under her reign, buildings were erected in a strict geometric manner, following ancient canons. However, the domes of churches were made in the old style. This was because they copied existing models. They did not understand the logic of forms. They took whatever was at hand, like a child building a model from pieces of different sets. The head is from one robot, the legs from another, the torso from a third. Something comes together, but there is no harmony. And this is repeated everywhere: the mixing of the incompatible. Gothic plus Baroque. Classicism plus Byzantine style. Ancient Russian decor on a building with Renaissance proportions. Elements from different eras, styles, and traditions assembled into one structure. This is not an evolution of architecture. This is not a development of style. This is a chaotic reconstruction. The urgent task: to transform industrial buildings into temples. It doesn't matter how. The main thing is that there is a cross on the dome, that the altar faces east, and that from a distance it resembles a church. And inside, asphalt, and by the walls, grinding stones. And the seams in the walls scream, this is not monolithic. This is a prefabricated structure made up of different parts. Yes, churches have basements. Yes, there are windows and doors underground. This has been discussed many times, and the topic is quite worn out. But here's what's important. These are not habitable basements. Look at the windows below ground level at the Church of the Annunciation in Tula. They are small, narrow slits about 30 centimeters wide, with thick iron grills. These are not windows meant for people. Larger windows were made for living quarters to let in light and allow for room ventilation. These windows are for the ventilation of machinery. If you descend into the basement, which is possible in some churches, you will see a strange sight. The ceiling heights are 3 meters or even more. Thick brick vaults designed to bear immense loads above. Support columns standing with mathematical precision every 4 to 5 meters. The floor consists of thick stone slabs laid on a sand cushion to dampen vibrations. Look at the walls. Rusty metal hooks are embedded in the masonry. Large, thick, and weathered with time. What are they doing in the church basement? For hanging icons? For storing church utensils? Absurd. These hooks can bear loads of hundreds of kilograms. They were used to hang heavy items, perhaps hides for the tanning process, maybe bags of raw materials, perhaps parts of mechanisms that needed to be lifted and secured. Pay attention to the holes in the walls, round, with a diameter of about 10 to 15 centimeters, going through the wall to the outside. Officially, they say, for ventilation, to drain moisture. But take a closer look. These holes are not arranged randomly. They are lined up in rows, at the same height, with the same spacing, as if something was passed through them. Pipes? Rods? Wires? In the factories of the 18th and 19th centuries, basements were used to house heavy machinery, water wheels that turned drive shafts, flywheels that stored energy, gear systems, belts, chains. Down below, in the basement, there was power. And up above, to the floors, were the shafts that drove the machines. Such basements required ventilation. The mechanisms heated up. Oil evaporated. Dust rose. If there wasn't a flow of fresh air, the workers suffocated and the equipment overheated. That's why narrow windows with grills were made, to let air pass through, but to prevent anyone from crawling in. And that's why holes were drilled in the walls, to create a draft, ensuring air circulation throughout the entire basement. All of these are signs of industrial purposes. These are not basements for storing church utensils. These are technical spaces designed for heavy work. They buried uninhabited houses. They buried industrial infrastructure, the kind that the new owners couldn't launch, the kind whose principles of operation they didn't understand. It was easier to bury the first floor, level the ground to the second or third floor, and start using the buildings anew, under the new function, under the churches. And now, the last question. Why? Why was this massive operation to turn factories into temples necessary? Imagine a scene. The end of the 17th century. Russia after a catastrophe. What exactly it was? We can only speculate. Perhaps it was a global flood that buried cities in mud flows. Maybe it was a war that destroyed the previous civilization. It could have been a climate shift, an epidemic, or famine. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the old world has perished or vanished. Buildings remain, sturdy, stone, functional. Industrial structures, warehouses, manufactories, perhaps residential houses. All of it stands empty. Buried in soil, covered in debris, yet it stands. The brick is strong, does not rot, does not crumble. New owners are coming, or the survivors who don't remember how they lived before. They find these buildings, dig them up, try to understand how they worked. They look at the columns, the asphalt floors, the narrow windows in the basements. They don't understand. The technologies are lost. There are no blueprints. The old masters are dead. But the buildings are empty. Huge spaces. What to do with them? We need to occupy them. Give the new people, those who came after the catastrophe, or those who survived but lost their memory, a control system. And the best tool for control is religion. Religion explains the world. It tells us where we come from, why we live, and where we are going. It provides rules, what is permissible and what is not. It subordinates the will to a higher power that cannot be seen but must be obeyed. It compels people to gather in one place, in church, where they can be counted, monitored, and influenced with the necessary ideas. And here's the plan. They take empty industrial buildings, en masse across the country. They transform them into churches. They add altars. They install domes and crosses. They hang icons. They invite priests. They start services. People are told, these are temples. Prayer has always taken place here. This is your heritage, your faith, the faith of your fathers and grandfathers. Look, there's a plaque, built in such and such a year. Here are the entries in the church books. Everything is documented. History has been rewritten. A new religion has been introduced. Control has been established. The documents are a formline. The chronicles have been compiled. Everything is official, legal, sanctified by the church and the state. Only the seams on the walls scream, lie. The asphalt on the floor screams, lie. The grinding stones at the foundation scream, lie. You will say, this is too large scale an operation. It's impossible to coordinate such a thing. Too many people would have had to be involved. Someone would have let it slip. Someone would have written, left notes, memoirs. Is the church schism not a form of coordination? At the same time, old believers began to be persecuted all over Russia, following the same script, burning the same books, changing the same rituals, constructing churches following the same model. This was not happening spontaneously. It was a plan, centralized, thought out, and strictly controlled. The government had resources. The church had structure, hierarchy, and a nationwide network. Both had the motivation to control a populace that had survived a catastrophe and might remember something of the past. It was necessary to erase that memory, to instill a new faith, a new history, new symbols. And the old buildings with a new function were perfect for this approach. The only question is, what do the walls conceal? And here is the last question that won't let me rest. If churches are repurposed factories, manufactories, industrial buildings, then what were they producing? What technologies were used? Why are they so carefully concealed? The asphalt on the floor is not a coincidence. It is a material designed for spaces with high loads, vibrations, and the need for a level surface. Such a floor is necessary where machines, mechanisms, and heavy equipment are located. Whetstones are not just decor. They are tools for metalworking, sharpening tools, and perhaps grinding materials. No craft or industrial production could do without them. Columns are not for decoration. They are support structures for interfloor ceilings, designed to distribute the load from equipment or goods in a warehouse. High ceilings are not meant for the acoustics of prayers or for creating a sense of God's grandeur. They are a requirement for ventilation. When furnaces and machines are operating, when processes that emit heat, smoke, and dust are occurring, height is necessary for the hot air to rise so that people below can breathe. Narrow windows in basements are not for lighting. They are ventilation openings for the mechanisms that were located below. Everything indicates that the buildings served an industrial purpose, a purpose that we do not currently understand, or do not want to understand, because it would disrupt the official narrative. The narrative that the 17th and 18th centuries were a time of flourishing orthodoxy in Russia, a time of building churches, monasteries, and spiritual uplift. But in reality, it was an era of redivision, an era of seizing someone else's legacy, an era of substituting functions and rewriting history. We live among buildings that remember another life. We pray in workshops. We light candles on the foundations of former factories. We take communion in halls where machines once stood. Flywheels turned, metal was processed, and something was produced that we have forgotten. And as long as the walls are not plastered, while the bricks are visible, and the joints are not filled with fresh mortar, the clues remain. They remain silent under the layer of paint, but as soon as the plaster starts to crumble, they begin to speak. The stone doesn't lie. It waits. It waits for someone to look closely, for someone to ask the right questions, for someone to stop believing in signs and start believing in seams, bricks, asphalt, sharpening stones. When someone wants to know the truth, not a comfortable lie. The truth is in the stone, in the seams, in the details that haven't been concealed yet. It waits for you. Just approach any old church. Find a spot without plaster and look. Let's take specific examples. Yaroslavl, the Church of Elijah the Prophet. The 17th century, more precisely the year 1650. Officially, it is one of the first stone parish churches in the city, built with the money of the Skripini merchants. A beautiful structure. 5 domes, frescoes, tiles. A monument of architecture of federal significance. Approach it. Find the section of the wall where the plaster has crumbled. Look at the northern wall, where the main volume connects with the chapel. Do you see the line? A vertical seam. The brick on the right is darker. On the left, it's lighter. Attempts to tie it together that don't hold. Metal dowels hastily driven in. The Church of John the Baptist in Yaroslavl, also from the 17th century. The plaque states, built in the year 1671. 15 domes, unique architecture, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Come closer. Take a look at the junction of the chapels with the main building. The seams. Different masonry. Different periods. Kostroma, the Church of the Resurrection on Debra. 17th century. 5 domes. Ornate decor. Frescoes inside. On the plaque, the year 1652. Officially, it is said that it was built over 10 years with the money of merchant Kirill Isakov, who traded with England. But approach the eastern wall, where the altar section connects to the refectory. Do you see the seam? Do you notice how the shade of the brick changes? Do you see the attempts at staggering, which look like a patch? And the most interesting thing is that in the basement of this church, if you can get there, you will see the same narrow ventilation windows with grates, the same thick vaults, the same hooks in the walls. Everything just like in Tula, like in Yaroslavl, as if the same engineering project was applied across the entire country. Nizhny Novgorod, the Church of the Nativity of John the Baptist on the Trade Square. 17th century, 1680 is inscribed on the plaque. A brick structure, 5 domes, a tent-shaped bell tower. If you walk around it from the north side, where the plaster has fallen off in large chunks, you will see the same picture. Joints, different masonry, attempts to connect the incompatible. And under the church is a cellar with high arches and narrow windows. Archaeologists who conducted excavations in the early 2000s found strange metal structures embedded in the walls. Officially, it was stated that these were ties for reinforcing the foundation. But if you look at the photographs from the excavations, it's clear that the metal isn't just random, but follows a specific pattern. Horizontal and vertical rods connected at nodes, like a framework for something, or wiring for some kind of system. Vladimir, the Church of Nicholas in Galiak, also from the 17th century. The plaque states 1732nd year. But if you step inside and look at the structure of the walls, you will notice something peculiar. The thickness of the walls is uneven. On one side, it is 1.5 bricks, while on the other side, it is 2.5. This is not a construction mistake. It is a sign that a new wall was added to the existing one. They thickened the structure to support the dome, which was not originally planned. And again, the altar has been added. Again, the seams at the joints. Again, different materials, different laying techniques. Suzdal. There are so many churches that the town is referred to as an open-air museum. Almost all date back to the 17th and 18th centuries, and almost all show signs of modification. The Church of Cosmas and Damian on Yaronova Hill, seams at the altar joint. The Church of Antipius on Market Square, seams. The Church of the Entrance of the Lord into Jerusalem, seams. Pattern, system, identical traces throughout Central Russia. This cannot be a coincidence. It cannot simply be a feature of the construction technologies of that era, because they didn't build like that in the 12th to 13th centuries. So, did they suddenly start in the 17th to 18th? Why? Kostroma, the Church of the Resurrection on Debra. Officially built in the year 1652. The only remaining merchant church in Kostroma. Again, the seams. Again, the misalignment of the brick courses at the junction of the altar and the main building. It's not 3 coincidences. It's a system. It's a pattern that repeats from city to city, from church to church. And the more closely you look, the more you find. And now let's talk about the domes, because the domes are a separate story, a distinct clue that something is amiss here. Look at the old Russian churches from the pre-Mongol period. The Assumption Cathedral in Vladimir. One dome. Simple form, functional. The Dmitrievsky Cathedral. One dome. The Church of the Intercession on the Neural. One dome. This is the canon of ancient Russian architecture. A single domed temple. Strict, concise, unified. Now look at the 17th century churches. 5 domes, 7 domes, 9, 13, 15 domes on the Church of John the Baptist in Yaroslavl. Why? What has changed over 300 to 400 years? The official narrative states, the development of architecture, the complexity of forms, the wealth of clients, the desire to create something grand. If you think this explains the multi-headedness, take a close look at these domes. They are all different. Different in size, different in shape, different in decoration. As if they were made by different craftsmen at different times, according to different patterns. And most importantly, they often do not match the main building. The church is designed in a classical style, strict and geometric. The domes, on the other hand, are Baroque, lavish, adorned with curls and stucco. Or vice versa. The main building is Baroque, while the domes are simple, almost primitive, as if they were made when the original vision was no longer understood. This is not an evolution of style. It is copying. They take a model from here, a dome from there, decor from a third source. They assemble it like a building kit, as long as it resembles a church, as long as there is a cross on top. But why the cross? Have you ever wondered why the crosses on all Orthodox churches are of this particular shape? An 8-pointed cross with a slanted lower arm. This is not the only form of the cross in Christianity. Catholics use a simple 4-pointed cross. Arminians have a cross with flaring ends. The Coptic Church has its own version. Why was the 8-pointed cross specifically used in Russia? And why did it become widespread in the 17th century after the church schism? Before the schism, the crosses were different. Official historians even write about this, albeit reluctantly. There were 4-pointed crosses, 6-pointed ones, and those with a crescent at the base. A variety of forms. And after the schism, standardization. One type of cross, everywhere, on all churches, as if by a single template. As if someone from above gave the command, do it this way and no other. This is not a natural evolution of the symbol. It is the imposition of a standard, from the top down, rigidly and swiftly. The old believers were persecuted, among other reasons, for refusing to accept the new cross. They insisted on the old one, the two-finger sign, on old icons, on old forms. For this, they were burned. For this, they were exiled. For this, they were executed. Why was it so important for the new authorities to change the shape of the cross? If it's just a symbol, what difference does it make how many bars it has? What if the cross is not just a symbol? What if it served some technical function? What if the old cross was part of a system that the new owners did not understand and wanted to destroy? There is a theory, controversial, not officially recognized by science, but nonetheless intriguing, that the crosses on churches were antennas, part of a global energy network. They captured atmospheric electricity, resonated with the domes, which functioned like capacitors, and transmitted energy down into the building. That is precisely why the crosses were made of metal. That is why their shape was so important. Different geometries provide different resonant frequencies. That is why, after the catastrophe, when the system stopped working, the new owners replaced the functional crosses with decorative ones. They preserved the shape to keep it recognizable, but removed the function. Evidence? There are no direct ones, because everything has been destroyed. But there are indirect ones. Why do old churches so often reveal traces of metal structures embedded in the walls? Why do strange copper or iron rods emerge from underneath the plaster, running from the dome down to the foundation? Officially, they say, this is reinforcement, structural support. But if this is just a reinforcement, why are they so carefully hidden with plaster? Why are they often removed during restoration and not restored? Why are there so few drawings where these connections are shown? What if it wasn't rebar, but wiring? The wiring of that very system that we don't understand. Let's return to the sharpening stones. We talked about the Church of George in Tula, but that's not the only place. In Yaroslavl, near the Church of Nikola Nadane, there are also round stones with holes. In Kostroma, by the Church of the Resurrection on Debra. In Suzdal, near several temples. The same picture is everywhere. Industrial artifacts by the walls of religious buildings. Why? A coincidence? Convenience? Did they just transport unnecessary junk to the churches because there was space there? I don't believe it. Too many coincidences. Too systematic. These stones are placed where they worked. This means the churches were located near the production sites, or they were part of the production. And now imagine the scale of the reconstruction operation. The whole country, from the western borders to the Urals, from the northern seas to the southern steppes. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of buildings, simultaneously, in a short historical period. Who could have organized this? Only power. Centralized, strong, with resources and motivation. The church plus the state, patriarch plus czar, Nikon plus Alexei Mikhailovich. The schism was not a religious conflict. The schism was a tool for redistribution. Declare the old faith a heresy, and you gain the moral right to destroy everything associated with it. Books, icons, rituals, buildings. And in place of the old, build the new, your own, controlled. And there's no need to convince everyone. It's enough to frighten them. Show a few exemplary punishments. Burn a couple of protopopes at the stake. Send Boyarinya Morozova to a monastery, where she will die of starvation. The rest will fall silent. They will accept the new, because they are afraid. And those who do not accept, declare them schismatics and cast them out. Let them go into the woods, into hermitages, away from the cities. There they are not dangerous. There they will not ask questions. And the people will believe, because there are no alternatives. Because the authorities speak with one voice. The old is bad, the new is good. Old churches are wrong, new ones are right. Old books are heretical, new ones are true. And after a couple of generations, even memory fades. The grandchildren no longer remember what came before. They live in a new reality. They pray in new churches, which, as they are told, were built by their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. They believe the plaques on the walls. They do not look at the seams. Only seams remain. Only asphalt beneath the feet. Only grinding stones at the foundation. And now let's ask ourselves the most terrifying question. What if this is not the first time it's happening? What if history is cyclical? What if every few centuries a catastrophe occurs that erases memory, destroys civilization, and on its ruins a new one is built? Look at the timeline. The 12th century, the flourishing of pre-Mongol Rus, white stone architecture, high culture. The 13th century, Mongol invasion, everything destroyed. The 14th to 15th centuries, recovery, but on a different level. The 16th century, the time of troubles, wars, famine. The 17th century, the schism, a new wave of church building. Every 100 to 200 years, a reset. Every time, a rewriting of history. Every time, new buildings that are supposedly just constructed, but in reality are remodeled from the old ones. And every time people believe. Because there are no other sources of information. Because those in power control knowledge. Because those who remember the truth are physically eliminated or exiled. Right now, we are living in yet another cycle. We believe we know our history, that textbooks tell the truth, that churches were built by pious merchants, that everything is logical and explainable. But the seams in the walls tell a different story. And if we learn to read them, if we stop believing the signs and start believing the stone, perhaps we will discover something that has been hidden from us for centuries. Maybe we'll understand who we really are, where we came from, what we lost, and who took it from us. I'm not claiming that I know all the details. Perhaps the picture is more complicated than it seems. There may have been other reasons, other circumstances. I might be mistaken in certain specifics, but one thing cannot be taken away from me. The seams on the walls don't lie. They show that the altars were added later. The buildings were constructed as a single functional whole, and the religious part was added afterwards. This is evident. It can be verified. Approach any old church, find a section without plaster, and see for yourself. The asphalt on the floors does not lie. It shows industrial purpose. Asphalt is not laid in temples for prayer. It is laid in workshops, on factories, where strength and protection from loads are needed. This is a fact. This is a proof that can be touched with your hands. Sharpening stones at the foundations do not lie. They weigh tons. They are not just moved for no reason. They are found where they were used. And they were used near churches, which means that the churches were part of industrial complexes. This is a logic that cannot be refuted. The absurd construction timelines are not misleading. 75 years for a single church, while the Kremlin was built in 6, does not align with any economic model. This means that either the dates are fake, or they weren't building the church, but instead renovating it. There are no other options. The blending of architectural styles does not lie. Classicism with Baroque, Gothic with Byzantine style. This is not harmonious development, but chaotic imitation. It is a sign that it was assembled from ready-made pieces, without understanding the original logic. The mass emergence of churches after the schism does not lie. Hundreds of temples in just 1 century, during a period of ruin and poverty, is impossible if building from scratch. It is possible if repurposing already existing buildings. Everything together forms a picture. Clear, logical, verifiable. These buildings were industrial structures. They were converted into churches, on a large scale, across the entire country. After the church schism, which was not a religious conflict, but a tool for redistributing power and control over the population, the story has been rewritten. The function of buildings has changed. Memory has been erased. But the clues remain. In the stone, in the seams, in the asphalt, in the sharpening stones, in the absurd dates on the plaques. And now the question is, what to do with this knowledge? Simply take note of it and forget? Or start looking at the world with different eyes? Every time you pass by an old church, ask questions. Approach the walls. Look for areas without plaster. Examine the seams. Observe the brickwork. Compare the main building with the altar section. Check the dates on the plaques. Look for grinding stones, metal hooks, and strange windows in the basements. Collect evidence. Take photos. Document. Share your findings. Because every church is a clue. Every seam is a testament to the fact that we were deceived. And the more people see this, and the more people start asking questions, the harder it will be to maintain the official version. Start with the church in your city, the one you pass by every day. Approach it not as a parishioner, but as a researcher. Walk around the building's perimeter. Find a section of the wall where there is no plaster or where it has crumbled away. Look at the brickwork. Search for vertical joints, especially where the main mass transitions into the altar area. Take a photo. Zoom in on the image. Do you see how the color of the brick changes on different sides of the joint? Do you see how the rows of masonry don't align? Do you see the attempts to connect the two parts with metal rods? This is proof. Descend to the foundation if possible. Check if there are any windows below ground level. Look at their size, the grills, and how they are positioned. These are not residential windows. They are for ventilation. Look around the church. Perhaps there are strange stones lying near the walls, round ones with holes. You might find metal parts, unfamiliar structures, pieces of old mechanisms. Every detail matters. Every detail adds a piece to the overall picture. And when you have accumulated enough photographs, enough observations, you will understand. This is not a coincidence. This is a system. This is the trace of a global operation to reshape the functions of buildings, to erase memory, to substitute history. The stone does not lie. It waits. It waits for you to come closer, to look, and to ask questions, correct questions. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss new investigations. There are still many mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to search for clues, ask uncomfortable questions, and explore what official science tends to overlook. Because the truth is always close by. You just have to want to see it.